Hello there. Hey, it's Tom Jordan. Michigan politics. We're going to talk about that today because it is gearing up for a bit of a leadership shakeup. Will it bring fresh strategy or more of the same? We're going to get into that today with one of the candidates to lead the GOP in the state of Michigan. Both Michigan's Democratic and Republican parties, they are set to elect new leaders for next year. Lavora Barnes is stepping down as the Michigan Democratic Party chair, while Pete Hoekstra transitions to serve as U.S. ambassador to Canada under Donald Trump. So, State Senator Jim Runestad, he has declared his candidacy for Michigan GOP chair. That was big news just a few days ago. We're going to have him on the program to talk about what he prioritizes, where the direction he thinks the Michigan Republican Party should be going. But he does promise this. He does promise accountability, and he also promises unity in what has been somewhat of a fractured Republican Party as of late. And then there are other figures like Mashawn Maddock and others speculated to join the race along with Jim Runestad as well. On the Democratic side of this, Mark Ludwig has announced his run, and Curtis Hertel Jr., a Governor Gretchen Whitmer ally, is also rumored to be considering a candidacy. So in a moment, I'll be joined live by Senator Jim Runestad, one of the candidates to lead the Michigan GOP. That's coming up in just a few seconds. Also, just a reminder to chime in. I want to hear from you, and you can comment. You can ask questions of the senator as well if you would like. We'll pose those to him in the comments section wherever you're watching. If it's YouTube, you can do it there. Facebook, on X. And again, the podcasts live on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well. And the best way you can really help us here at Tom Jordan Live, simply subscribe to our podcast, click the notification bell, and watch the programs, and then share them with your friends and even maybe with your enemies. See what they think as well. All right, let's get into this. Michigan's political scene bracing for a bit of a shakeup as both major parties prepare to choose new leaders. And on the Republican side, is, as I mentioned, State Senator Jim Runestad. He is stepping forward. He has already, and he vows to bring accountability to the Republican Party, but also unity. And accountability really should be what he's been fighting for in the state legislature for many, many years. And a real focus on securing victories. You got to keep winning if you're going to put through the what we believe the public has mandated in the state of Michigan. They won the House, obviously, in this last election. So, meantime, names like Mashawn Maddock, who's a proven fighter for herself. She's got some grassroots values, sparking speculation about a potentially crowded and competitive race. And again, across the aisle, as I mentioned, the Democrats are grappling with a whole lot of uncertainty about the direction of their party. Lavora Barnes is stepping down. She's out of there. Mark Ludwig has declared his candidacy. Curtis Hertel Jr., I mentioned, a close ally of the governor, who is a far-left progressive, is reportedly considering a bid as well. And, Curtis Hertel, his history of towing the establishment line could signal more of the same for the Michigan Democrats if he gets in. But a lot of people looking at these particular leadership races saying the stakes could not be higher in this. Leadership decisions will define whether each party builds momentum heading into the critical elections or stumbles under the weight of political infighting and some failed strategies. So let's get right into it right now with Senator Jim Runestad, who wants to lead the state GOP. Senator, it is great to have you back in the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Yours is one of those shows that people really should be tuning into because the controlled media very often is going to completely mislead people about what's going on, about even what people say. So this is a great opportunity to be able to talk to people unfiltered and with enough time to flesh out the ideas. So I'm excited to be on, and I thought I would give just a real short introduction to who I am.
Yes, please. That'd be great.
There may be people who don't know who are watching this. And so I was raised on a family farm. I have a great wife, Kathy. We've been married for decades. I have 5 kids. I have 14 grandkids, all within about 45-minute drive of my house. So I'm going nowhere. I am invested in the state of Michigan. and I got to make sure that it works, and that is my goal. So what started me in politics, I was a guy with a bullhorn and organizing people with placards and going out and marching, and learned that whole kind of activist necessary skill set. But I found out I couldn't accomplish the goals I wanted to. They were much broader. So I joined a Republican club and grew it into the largest monthly attended club in the state of Michigan when I left in 2008. So I learned the entire club structure, which is very important because there's a lot of other organizations, not just county party and district party, but there's a lot of other organizations. So I learned that A to Z, how all of that works. And then ran for a county commission where I got through E-Verify, which required all the employers, contractors, subcontractors, employees, all to use E-Verify to make sure we were not using illegal aliens, which we had thousands there. Took me 4 months to get that accomplished. Went into the House and then the Senate, where almost every year I've been ranked in just about every ranking at near or at the top of the conservative ranking. So that's my background, and that's all of the ability and necessary experience I bring to this position, which I believe really needs a lot of additional work. There's I guess, a pretty large deficit from what I've seen in the finances. So we need somebody who can deal with those finances. And my job before I got into politics was in financial services. And I would have to sit down with clients that may have 5, 10, $15 million in an annuity that I had to get that check that night and build that confidence and trust with those clients, which is exactly the same thing that you have to do when you are raising money. They have to know that you can be trusted first and foremost. Secondly, that you're not going to waste the money. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I am running is what I have seen for many years, decades really, that there's a whole model where a consultant who's really a political vendor will work to get somebody, a figurehead, elected into the office of the chair, and then the chair just diverts the money or allows the consultant to divert the money into the multitude of companies that the consultant owns. And they milk the money in an outrageous way, sometimes taking 50% of all the money into their pocket on something that should be maybe 5 to 20% charge. So you could see how people can just make millions if they get their person into this office. And that is something that I want to stop, or we would competitively bid all of this stuff. I also want to build unity and coalitions within the party. And it's been said before, but I've never seen evidence of it. I talked to Kent County Republicans yesterday, and I said I would travel around and get out to groups like this and talk to you and get your feedback. I wouldn't have all the answers, nobody does. And what you find usually happens is the chair hires a bunch of gatekeepers. The gatekeepers keep everybody out except a few, beloved people. And now you have an isolated chair. I would want to get out and talk to these people. So what I have done my entire career, all my 10 years, I was ranked as doing some of the highest number of community events, coffee hours, and I would just throw it open. I'd give a quick update, and you tell me what you think. You criticize, you ask questions, and I've done it that way all the way through. And that way, you get what is going on, what are the concerns. You get all the questions. I've done that my entire political career. I'm very used to doing that. So I have no problem with going around the state, meeting with groups and getting their feedback, which is one of the biggest complaints I've heard about state party. It's an isolated little ivory tower of people who nobody could ever reach. You don't know what they are doing. There's no transparency or very little transparency. So this is the stuff that I would really like to accomplish going forward. In terms of these various ethnic groups that Donald Trump did a fabulous job pulling together. My reputation among these groups, I don't have time to outline it all, but I was named a friend of India for the entire Indian community for the state of Michigan. Been the only person invited to the Annapolis New Year's celebration, and the Vietnamese, very connected to the Chaldean community. So this outreach is something that we have to continue what Donald Trump's been doing if we're going to bring these groups together. There's one other thing I'll mention, and I'll throw it back to you, is on December 13th or 14th, there's going to be a vote by the state committee on whether to charge a fee in order to be able to run for the county party chair. And they banted around a number of figures, 50,000, and they voted on whether to do 20,000. That came up 2 votes shy. They're taking this up again, and there's a feeling they will get that 20,000 implemented. And I know that they're trying to say, well, can you raise money if you can raise this 20,000? Problem is that goes right to them into the state party, and if you lose, it's gone. In the meantime, you also have to run thousands, tens of thousands to run for office. You got to raise. So something a much smaller amount to me would show that you have the wherewithal to raise money, but give enough people with great ideas and support base an opportunity to at least be in play and make their voices heard. So it is my hope that they don't implement that, because I think the base is going to say, what is this? The consultants who simply will pay those fees. Several people have to contribute to this, but they could just launder, that money through a number of people, because there's no campaign finance involved with this race. There's no transparency where the money comes from. So anyway, I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Yeah, well, I think thanks for sharing that summary, and you touched on a number of points that I want to dig in on a little bit more. But one of these things, the fee, obviously, I would be opposed to that, because I think that anybody should run for this, and I do think it's a money grab, and I do think there is something that you touched on that I want to dive into, because transparency is a real big issue, and you mentioned that there's there's a lot of people, a lot of money to be made. Some people are making millions of dollars when they get into the, vendor aspect of, getting into the political world. And the problem with Michigan, and I know Idaho is got a problem as well, but they're seemingly trying to fix the issue they have there with transparency, and that leaves Michigan the only state in the country that doesn't have what would be common sense transparency laws, like the Freedom of Information Act with the legislature and with the governor's office. So far, that's not a Michigan priority, and we keep hearing it's going to change and whatnot. But what it ends up allowing is a lot of people getting away with a lot of things that they should not be getting away with. And for taxpayers or people who donate to political parties, I don't think, from my perspective, that they'd be real happy with what's happening with the money they're donating to get somebody elected ends up going to a variety of different, non-disclosed corporations or companies or consultants or vendors that are making a lot of money off the political industry, essentially, in the state of Michigan. So when it comes to transparency, how would you deal with that? I know you fought for it as a state senator in the legislature in general, but it's very difficult to push against this tsunami of I would say, special interests and to be successful. So, as a GOP chair, all you can deal with is your own party, obviously. But how would you deal with the issues of making sure the money that's in the party, you mentioned there's a deficit right now, that is actually spent in the most wise fashion possible, and is as efficient as it possibly could be?
There's a couple of big problems that has occurred for decades, and it's the lack of transparency. So, for instance, this whole issue with the consultants, which drives me nuts. It's usually one consultant will win the race for the chair of their figurehead. Once the figurehead's in, that consultant, there's a synergy there. There's a symbiosis that, I got you in office and now we're friends and you got to help me out. And then the money just gets directed, just like we see in Lansing, no big contracts with taxpayer dollars. That just angers the people. I've been fighting this as long as I've been in office. It's the same thing in the state party. It's basically a no bid contract to the person who may have spent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands to get that person into the office. People have no idea. They think, well, you just put your name in for the state party chair. Well, bada boom, you give a speech, you're in. You've got to travel the state. You have to, raise a lot of money. I think I can raise the money in an afternoon they're asking about, but it's not about me. It's about making sure everybody gets a voice here. And the people don't understand that on top of, say, a $20,000 fee you have to give to state party to run, you have to raise tens of thousands. You got to travel the state. You got to go to every event. Usually they want you to sponsor the event. You got
Hmm.
flyers that have to be mailed out to 7,000 people over and over to just make sure you're known. There's so many expenses if you're going to have a campaign that's viable to win this thing. And so you don't know who's behind it, who's buying people. There's no campaign finance transparency with anything you do with state parties. It's not like running for office. You don't have to report a single thing. So there's a lot of mischief that can go on. And for me, when you were the state party chair, what I would do is say, we're going to have transparency. In other words, a lot of the services provided by these so-called consultants they're just vendors. So they'll have a print shop, they'll have a operation where they do social media, or they'll do text messaging, and maybe it's text messaging might be 4 cents a piece, 3 cents a piece, which is common. They might charge 12 to 15 cents a piece, and milking the money away. And in all the services, you're just getting massively overcharged. I would say no, 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 no. We're going to have a system in place, whether it's the committee, state committee as a whole, or the budget committee. We're going to sit down and look at these vendors and what they're charging. So if we've got everybody's around, say, 3 cents, 4 cents a piece for text messaging services, and this guy's at 15, who's had the contract every year, no way. We're going to make sure that there's efficient use of the dollars that come in, and I think that will restore confidence of, excuse me, not only the big donors who can write big checks, but the average person. Are they going to write any money to a party when they think that the money is being drained off by some guy who lives a lavish lifestyle, flies people all over the place because of the money that they were able to get from these donors? So I will absolutely reinstall complete transparency to this process. Now, of course, you wouldn't want to get into every single specific where the Democrats would know every single thing you're doing. So, but certainly telling the budget committee or the committee at whole, which is not happening now, okay, here's what we have for bids. Here's what we'd recommend. Would you agree to this? That's not how it's ever been done. It's been like one guy said, okay, that sounds
Hmm.
good. And you don't know what's behind his saying that's
Hmm.
good. And then you find
Right.
out, but this guy charged 50% more than anyone else. So
Right.
a lot of it would have to come down to transparency.
Yeah, 50% more is not good. That's not efficiency, and it's a waste of money. I want to touch on this because you mentioned the E-Verify system that you had worked on in the past. That it verifies that somebody is a legal immigrant or somehow into the United States. And you mentioned there are, I think you said, thousands of illegal aliens who have been given jobs. Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I wish I had, this would be a whole segment in itself. When I ran for office for the county commission in 2008, it was in the midst of, you remember the 08, 09 meltdown of the entire economy, the Great Recession. So there was in Oakland County, the official number was 15%, but the real number was 25%. 25% of the people in 08, 09 were out of work in Oakland County. And I start talking to people. They said, we have 6 golf courses, all the maintenance work, most of the work and almost everything was done by illegal workers.
Hmm.
And one guy had a contract for all of this, and he was in the Hall of Shame for housing these illegal workers in Pontiac in like just rows and rows of sleeping bags, overcharging them in his apartment complexes. And then dig in further, the Pontiac International Airport in Waterford, same thing. It was all done by illegal workers.
Hmm.
Contract and subcontractors for all the asphalting for the road commission, thousands of illegal workers. And there was just so much of this graft and corruption because they save at least 40% on the dollar using illegal workers, but they're charging a boatload of money. They're also these same people with the big donors. We're back to this again. So I put in a bill to require E-Verify, which takes 5 seconds to verify if this person is here illegally or not. And I hit the biggest firestorm, at least up to that point in my life. Republicans, Democrats, it was a crescendo of rage. Of 25 commissioners, one supported my proposal. And I took off 4 months to fight that battle. I was told, listen, pull the bill and you're going to be good. But if you don't, we're going to primary you. This was from the Republicans. We're going to
Hmm.
primary you because you are upending the apple cart when you just walked in the door. I said, that's right. And I said, if you guys do not hold a vote, twice they refused to hold a vote, although we had like 130 people on a rainy Tuesday that were demanding a vote. They wouldn't vote on it. And I said, well, guys, next week is our only night meeting we're going to have for 6 months. I will have 500 people in the commissioner's auditorium, which holds 250, and they are going to be livid. And we're going to have 25 cameras for every one of your faces, and all your faces when you smirk and laugh like they were doing before. Everybody's going to see this because we're going to mail it out to people. There was no social media in those days, but there was email. And they said, you can't do that to the colleagues. And I said, listen, and then have the colleagues do the right thing. Tell them to vote yes. And but one thing they didn't know is I bought most of those cameras at thrift stores and they didn't work. But I was going to put them up.
You can admit it now, many years afterwards. So obviously,
anyway, it passed unanimous, so it worked out.
Well, good, and I think that's a battle that should have been fought. And I'm glad you did that. I want to talk to you about the latest few iterations of the Republican Party, because just a few years ago it was Ron Weiser, it was Laura Cox, and they stepped aside, and you got Christina Caramo in there, and there's been a lot of criticism of the Michigan Republican Party because you mentioned the deficit earlier. That's still there. It hasn't been cleaned up fully yet, but there was a lot of, it seems, recklessness, and as a result of that, a lot of the funding had dried up into the Republican Party. There were seats that were lost in districts that were used to be held in strong Republican districts. Those seats were lost. So what would you do to still clean up the mess? It sounds like Pete Hoekstra did a lot, but he didn't fully clean up the mess that's been left behind. Maybe not financially entirely, but he did a lot of good stuff there. What would you do to fully clean up the mess, bring the donors all the way back into the Republican Party, and then go out and make sure that the right candidates are winning these various seats in the state house, the Senate, the governor's office, and throughout the state?
Well, the first thing is you'd have to take care of that deficit. That means you've got to outreach as much as you possibly can to donors who have the wherewithal to write checks to help right the ship. That's the very first thing that's going to happen, because you're going to have that debt paid off. And then you're going to have money. People don't understand you got to pay for these employees. They don't, they just volunteer to be 8 hours a day, taking calls and doing the work. There's a lot of work that would have to be done. You got to pay them. So now you've got salaries that have got to be paid. So out of the chute, it's going to require righting the ship. And it is my intention, I've never attacked a single donor in the Republican Party, never will, and just going and meet with them and saying, this is for our kids, our grandkids, our you own companies and have homes, and your legacy is here. And let's make sure that we have a very effective party that's going to run on a complete, efficient basis, so that your money is not going to be wasted. Off complete transparency with any of these donors. I also, for a more ongoing basis, I was always one of the top donor fundraisers in the House and Senate, always number like 1, 2, 3 that were reporting how much money that they made. And I did a lot of high-end fundraisers. Most of my money was not raised in Lansing. It was with people in southeastern Michigan, and it was through high-end fundraisers. I've done fundraisers at Wabeek Country Club that was very successful, at Steinway Piano Dealer. We had a huge one with Vivek for our Kentucky Derby event. So you can actually make substantial money if you know how to do these. I know how to do these. So if you can replicate a lot of this around the state, you can start getting in money from other sources, because you definitely want to make sure you've got money coming in from every Republican at all from the state of Michigan. And a lot of it is making them feel, okay, what happens to this money? Normally they just say it just vanishes. They don't know. Was it used in primaries? That's something I would make sure none of this money ever gets diverted to primaries, that we wait until we get the field, and the Republican election and the primaries are now over. And we're going to pour the money into those critical seats in general elections to win. That's what the state party should be focused on. Those general election races in the critical seats, the vulnerable seats, and make sure that all the money is going to that and not to any other source. And if they see all of this change, which they would, if I'm the chair, they're going to see the transparency. And they're going to go, wow, this is like a well-oiled machine to win, and that would restore, I believe, a lot of the confidence.
All right, very good. Hey, listen, we have a couple questions. If I could bring you up, I know you got to run here, but I want to bring them up real quickly from our viewers here. We're going to start with Christopher Jakulski. I think I pronounced that. Maybe I don't know if I did or not, but Christopher, thank you for your comment. There was an opportunity for Gretchen Whitmer to give Michigan taxpayers as a tax break, and it was squandered to give businesses an incentive to stay in Michigan. Can this be undone? That's a very good question, Christopher. What do you think about that, Senator, in terms of the subsidies to keep these businesses in Michigan and bring some here? What should be done there?
Well, the gentleman is correct that there was a back in 2015, there was a bill passed that increased the gas tax, and there was a provision in there that if there is a fund balance that grows to a certain amount, that it will roll back the income tax. And it was a 0.20% rollback and 0.20% rollback. So it was a relatively small, but for the average person, it actually is quite a bit over the course of the year. And that number was hit. People didn't think that it would hit that number in terms of that surplus money coming in. And so it was an automatic rollback. Then it became a question of, was it permanent or was it for 1 year? The Democrats turned it over to Dana Nessel, and she said, "Oh yeah, for sure. It says 1 year, so that we can get the money train back growing again." And I believe the courts ruled, again, the Supreme Court, which all of this is Democrats, so there was none of that tax relief that was given. If you got the legislature, I don't think the governor is going to ever decrease any taxes anywhere, so you'd have to get her sign off. It's probably going to have to wait until we get a House, a Senate, and governor in the Republican victory side of things in order to achieve that. And that's why there's just one example is how important it is to elect Republicans over Democrats. And what was the second part of your question?
I think that covered it. I think that's important. I think you're right that we're not going to get any tax breaks as long as Democrats hold power. They might say they are, but that was a prime example where we had one because we had the surplus and revenue, but the Democrats stepped in. The Dana Nessel, as you mentioned, the Attorney General said, "No, that was meant for 1 year," even though that was never found in the legislation. And the ones who wrote those pieces of legislation said, "No, the intent was it is permanent." So all that went aside, and you have a Democratic control. And I spoke to a businessman yesterday. He said, "I've got to sell off property because people who are in business in Michigan can no longer do business because of the tax increases on businesses, not just on the residents." So a lot of them are fleeing the state. It's becoming more and more like California. Let's bring up another comment or a question here. It's Harry Sakelian's back. Hi, Harry. Happy Thanksgiving, Tom. Back at you, Harry. Please ask Senator Runestad how much he thinks is a reasonable amount for the fee to run for office. Example, $5,000, et cetera. Thanks, Harry Sakelian. Harry, thanks for that question. What do you think? What would be a reasonable fee? I know they're asking $20K now. What do you think?
I think in the range of 3 to 5,000. If there's an agreement, we need a fee. 3 to 5,000. If you can't go around and talk to people in your base or people at all, you can't even raise $3,000, and you're going to have to deal with big donors where you're going to be asking for hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million at these things, and you can't even raise $3,000 to meet this threshold. I think somewhere in maybe even 3 to 5,000. That's the most I would agree to. And I do understand that I've heard probably 2 dozen names, no, 3 dozen names already have surfaced for this position. So it just I think you have this. A big part of this job is raising money. There's just no two ways about it. And if you have no experience doing this, it'd be nice to know that before we find out you're installed in the position, and you say, "Well, fundraising, I don't like to do that." Well, that's
Well,
one of the
you're
biggest
out.
parts of the whole blasted
Yeah.
job. You better know how to do it. But again, even if to be competitive, if you do raise whatever that threshold is, that's the starting point because I've been meeting with a lot of people and hearing what budgets were for people running in the past. Wow, the numbers are substantial. This is a statewide race, and in 3 months, and you got to be absolutely everywhere. And there's a lot of expenses that go into this.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to weed out the ones that are not viable candidates for this job. All right, one more comment, and we'll let the senator go here. From Arlene Pearson. Hi, Arlene. Good to see you. Thank you, Senator Runestad. Shocking information on illegal employment by Michigan employers and agencies. It is. I know you advocated E-Verify for employment in Michigan, but shocked by the details you shared today. Arlene, I was a bit as well. I didn't know this had been going on as long as it had, and it's seemingly being approved by the state of Michigan, Senator. It's way back when you were starting to do this, back in 2008, and the E-Verify and whatnot, and the pushback you got back then. What do you think? If it was bad then, how bad do you think it is now?
Not long after I put that bill in and I got it passed in Oakland County, a commissioner in Macomb County called me and she put it in and got it passed as well. So we had those two counties. And then the legislators in Lansing started hearing about it. So I got invited to come up there and testify for a bill. I was the headliner and the person in the committee was a hostile committee, but I'm used to a hostile committee, so it was kind of fun. And it didn't get out of the chute. I put the bill in my first 2 years and had to trade to get, actually it was my second 2 years, trade because I was a committee chair. I said, all right, I'll run your committee, your bill here if you'll run mine. And he agreed to do that. It was, again, another buzzsaw. I mean, there is so many interests. I mean, companies that use the illegal labor have a benefit of 40% on the dollar for labor costs, which is oftentimes their biggest cost. So that, and again, back to the corruption, the amount of money that they have if they're using this illegal labor. In testimony, there was one construction company. There was one construction
That's
company
okay.
that had the bulk of the business, and six other companies came in and said they have two sets of books. This is what they say they're paying, and they're actually paying illegal workers under the table, and they're like $1 million less than us on a contract that we're all within 5% of each other. I couldn't get it through. I mean, so much of the stuff you got to fight is this stuff that you got to bring to light. And one of the things I've done in my 2 years in the minority is bring this stuff to the public. My whole role, because I can't get a bill through with the Democrats here, my whole role has been bringing the garbage that the Democrats have been putting out there to the public. And if I'm elected the chair for the first time, I would stay in the Senate. My obligations are maybe 10 to 15 hours of voting time. And the rest of the time, I would be traveling the state, and getting the message out to people across the state of Michigan. Here's what's happening. Here's what they're doing. That's never been done before because usually they're isolated. I will be in the belly of the beast fighting this stuff all the time and bringing that out. All of this stuff you're hearing, I'll be able to talk about as the chair. What the Republicans are doing that has not been reported, all the great things that we have been doing, will be doing. What is the terrible policies the Democrats are smashing through, the media is not covering. People are going to hear firsthand what is actually going on, and that has never been done like I would be doing it.
Well, good for you. And it's you're going to get a lot of pushback because, as you said, upsetting the apple cart isn't always met with opening arms, and it's not very much welcomed in a industry that wants to remain as quiet on some of the things they're doing as possible. Very much appreciate your time. We wish you all the best. Senator Jim Runestad, a candidate now for the chair of the Michigan Republican Party. Senator, it's always good to see you. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tom. Glad to be
All
on.
right. Give your dog a nice pet for Tom Jordan as well. Say so long. All right. Take care.
Will do.
All right. It's not a easy thing to do to run for chair. And listen, it's a party that needs good leadership. And I commend Pete Hoekstra. I think he did a good job restoring it to a degree from the damage that had been done. I think there were good intentions from the previous chair prior to Pete Hoekstra, but I don't think it just didn't work out at all. the way that was beneficial for the party in general. And then it ultimately seeps down to those who are conservative, and then it doesn't benefit them because they're not getting the candidates in those seats that need to be in those seats. So now we have a government right now until at least the House will get the Republican majority after the first of the year, but a Democratic Party who has turned this state into a far left bastion of everything that conservatives for the most part would find offensive, but they don't care. They're going to put their foot on the pedal and accelerator until they lose power. Speaking of losing power, you may have seen this, but it was a somber Vice President Kamala Harris attempting to inspire her supporters with a message of resilience, but inadvertently inspired a wave of ridicule instead. Critics say the very awkward tone and timing of her message, kind of her goodbye message, reflect deeper issues with her team's approach to public relations. Take a look at what Kamala Harris said so long, as she said so long after she lost her race to Donald Trump.
Just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
So what does that mean then? Is she calling for an uprising? They lost the election. Should they still hold on to power? Is that what she is advocating here for? Does under any circumstance even mean, election losses? You still got the same exact power. No, sorry, Kamala, but your power has been taken from you and from the Democratic Party. It was a strange message. Kamala Harris, it was meant, I guess, to rally her supporters, emphasizing resilience and the retention of political power despite the election loss. But her delivery in the context, coming off this very significant defeat, which, definitionally means you've lost power, she seems disconnected from reality. I don't know. There's been a lot of comments about what was going on inside of Kamala Harris's head there, but very much out of place for many of the viewers. Critics from across the political spectrum were quick to mock or question the judgment behind releasing this video. The remarks focused on Harris's demeanor, the message's tone, and the apparent lack of quality control from her team. Like, don't let her speak, because that's what happens. And it didn't really make sense anyway. What does it mean? You have the exact same power. Don't let anybody ever take your power away from you. It's all about power for a lot of these politicians. No, you don't have the same power. So in this post-election period, the appearances, the messaging, I would say pretty critical if she ever wants another chance to run for office. And the rumors are out there that she might run for governor of California. She might even run again for president in 2028. I don't think that's going to be very successful. She probably won't get through the primary. She never has, ever. In any case, the suggestion by critics that her staff may be unmotivated or even antagonistic highlights the ongoing stories out there, the narratives that are about disorganization or really dissatisfaction within Kamala Harris's circle. A lot of people thought she was a horrible boss. They've come out and said such, even when she was a senator, when she was vice president. Ill-prepared, hard to contain, and she wasn't very nice to them either. So her relative, Kamala Harris's relative absence, you may have noticed, you haven't seen much of her after she lost, absence from the spotlight since the election contrasts with this sudden and awkward re-entry into the spotlight. And there's a lot of skepticism now going around about her team's media strategy. Like, did they set her up? What did they give her ahead of time? And the mention of Donald Trump's popularity in a lot of these comments, particularly his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, highlights the stark differences and how each camp or campaign or individual or the team leverages media and public relations. So when your post-loss pep talk sparks more memes than motivation, it might be time to rethink the strategy. I would recommend, go back to Hawaii, stay in Hawaii for a few years, recoup, re-energize, and maybe think about a different career altogether. That's just my suggestion. I don't think she's listening to me. Okay, this was big news yesterday. I was actually very pleased. That guy right there, Jay Bhattacharya, Donald Trump's announcement of Dr. Jay Bhattacharya as his nominee to head the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. This is a major shift in the agency's focus if he gets this position, and it is much and well-deserved if he gets this. He was a guy that I was following in 2020 and ever since about his objective, scientific, data-driven approach to dealing with a major pandemic. And he's known for his leadership in challenging what was the conventional pandemic policies that were major failures back then. Through the Great Barrington Declaration, when that came out, and I apologize, maybe I put up the wrong video here, but that's looks like oh no, that's the pandemic stuff. I got that right. That was bear shells. Remember during the pandemic and the lockdowns? Yes. I just got distracted and confused there for a moment. Sorry about that. But he challenged, I think, in a very successful way, at least in my view, convincing me, he challenged the conventional pandemic policies. That Great Barrington Declaration, he released that, I think it was October of 2020, and it had 50,000 virologists and infectious disease specialists and physicians signing this thing. So he was right, and a lot of physicians knew it, but they were silenced by the powers that be at the NIH and the underlings at the CDC and what became the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden administration. But the Great Barrington Declaration turned out to be right. It was the way to deal with this. So Bhattacharya's appointment aligns with this broader push to reassess public health strategies and biomedical innovation. And he's going to be paired with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I think Donald Trump is poised to address chronic illness, regulatory reform, and transparency within medical research. Let's reveal the research that's been done, and they would not do that. And Jay Bhattacharya, if you haven't heard him before, he reveals all the information that was known in 2020 that the major health agencies, the deep state, if you want to call it, refused to allow to be released. And if somebody tried to release that information, they were treated with, they were out of the inner circle, and they lost power. Even though Kamala Harris says under no circumstances never let anybody take your power. Well, they have a lot of power to do that, so they took away people's power like him. But thankfully, he was on a lot of other non-legacy media outlets, and he got the message through enough to now he's being nominated for the director of the National Institutes of Health, and he's always been a very well-respected physician and researcher. Stanford University is where he is, professor there. He's got dual expertise in health policy and economics, and the co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, which criticized the prolonged lockdowns during COVID-19. And so now he's advocating for protecting vulnerable populations during another pandemic. That's what they should have done back then, while minimizing societal disruptions. And there's extensive research on, that he's done on government programs and biomedical innovation and the well-being of underserved communities. And he's got this collaborative vision with this partnership with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a prominent advocate for, vaccine safety and regulatory reform. And he's going to focus on addressing the chronic diseases that do exist and the root causes of health crises in America. He has got this intention to restore the NIH's credibility as really an international leader in medical research. So at the very least, this is a symbolic shift, a break from the agency's status quo, emphasizing innovation over bureaucracy, a realignment of health policy priorities, skepticism toward institutional orthodoxy. Good. You should listen. This is a particular interview he did a couple years back, and he goes through all the things they learned, what the lockdowns, the quarantines have done that still they will not release, what they have done to children, what they've done to society at large, in this country for sure is where he focuses on, but internationally as well. It was absolutely the wrong choice to do what he did. And this is an interview done by the Hoover Institution, so you can look it up. Great. It's easy to find. Just go to YouTube or wherever. But the broader implications of this pick, it's obviously going to spark debate. The people that still think that quarantines were the way to go, even after, because they're not seeing the data, because the data is not being released, the studies, so it was just the wrong thing to do. But it's going to spark a lot of debate over the role of the NIH in these public health policy decisions, and the balance between innovation and regulation, and what do we do with these, governing bodies overseas, and the World Health Organization, which totally supports locking down by their authority and by their orders and mandates. A global organization can now, under Joe Biden, tell the United States when and where they need to lock down society based on their health recommendations, turning out to be mandates. So good. This is so encouraging to see that this is now the guy who's going to bring common sense back to the National Institutes of Health. And I think it does appeal to voters. They're concerned with pandemic era policies and the systemic health challenges that do exist. We have an unhealthy country in terms of the obesity rates and children's health, and it's time to reverse that. But how do you reverse it if it's the people that have been in power for decades now are really the ones that have led to these decisions and recommendations and guidelines that now a lot of people are arguing are what exactly have led to the health crises in this country. So good, bring them in. Breakthrough, I think, major. This nomination, Jay Bhattacharya, it's a significant pivot from these fear-driven policies to fearless innovation and objectivity. Let's lay it all out there for the public to see. We'll make our decisions based on the real data and science. I'm going to take your comments here in a second, but I want to bring this up because this is a typical pay-to-play. Jim Runestad, he was talking about how this exists in politics. Well, look at this guy. You know him, Al Sharpton. Well, he's in the midst of a pay-to-play scandal right now that is unfolding within MSNBC. It's a very troubling situation. Alleged conflicts of interests, undisclosed financial ties to Kamala Harris, and questionable journalistic ethics with these undisclosed donations. So Vice President Kamala Harris, she gave Al Sharpton $500,000. Did you know that? If you've been paying attention the past day, you probably have. Kamala Harris's campaign gave Al Sharpton's organization, his National Action Network, $500,000 before the friendly interview that he had her come on his show on MSNBC. And neither Al Sharpton nor the network disclosed this financial tie. The Federal Election Commission, the filings expose the payments. They have to. And there's a lot of sharp criticism now, probably from within MSNBC, even though the ones that are still somewhat ethical inside that building are probably like, wait a second, you can't take money from a candidate and then have that candidate on your show. So at MSNBC, there is some internal fallout there. And some of the staffers are expressing an outrage when they found out about this, calling the situation grifty and gross. With a pay-to-play odor is what they say. This is such like liberal language that they use. It's gross. Anyway, it is gross, and I commend them for saying such things. But Al Sharpton's colleagues view him as kind of operating outside the normal journalistic standards because of his, political activism. Why does he even have a show at MSNBC? Anyway, that's beside the point. But this is a bridge too far, is what they're even saying. So there's a lot of disappointment, a lot of distrust pervading the network now, you think? By the way, if you're so upset with Al Sharpton, why aren't you equally upset with Rachel Maddow, who's making tens of millions of dollars off of the false lies that she's been, spouting from that network for years now? Anyway, let's go back to Al Sharpton. Employees now are questioning whether or not this scandal undermines its credibility at MSNBC. We got to be concerned about our credibility, and this is the only thing that they can see is undermining their credibility. So MSNBC's response to this, the network claims it was unaware of the donations. The insiders there at MSNBC say that's implausible. You had to be aware of this. So there's a lot of skepticism remaining that Al Sharpton may not be all that trustworthy. Oh, that's a shocker. And he might pay some consequences as a result. He might. What do you mean might? He should. He took $500,000 from the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, for her to come on the show. The network has historically been lenient with these high-profile figures. So there's a lot of concerns, and maybe even broader than just the network, as they should be. The scandal is highlighting the the objective double standards within MSNBC and the potential reputational damage to both the network and Kamala Harris's political career. How many people did she pay off to support her? She gave what? Oprah Winfrey $1 million? She gave Al Sharpton $500,000. Who else is out there? All these people that say they came around and supported her. Did she pay Joe Biden? Or maybe she didn't pay Joe Biden. That's why he had these awkward press conferences when she was out giving her speeches. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe it was money. He wasn't getting enough. I don't know. That's speculation. That cannot be verified, what I just said. But there are a lot of critics out there, and they're arguing that this totally reflects poorly on journalistic integrity. But the guy's not a journalist. He is an activist. Again, why is he on that network? Because it's an activist network. And it eroded public trust long ago in media neutrality. And it's so funny to me when I watch these MSNBC shows and they talk about things about these right-wing networks spewing disinformation, unlike us here at MSNBC, who in their minds are completely neutral. You got Joy Reid over there who's constantly calling people names, comparing them to dictators from Germany and Russia and Italy just because you voted for a guy that actually believes in the Constitution and doesn't want to erode the separations of power within our federal government, which would give party control to one particular partisan outlet, which has gone far left. So that's the Joy Reids of the world and the Rachel Maddows of the world. So Al Sharpton, to me, is right in that category of a Rachel Maddow. And even, the whole Brian Williams guy. Remember what happened to him? I mean, didn't that erode enough credibility within NBC, and they tried to bury it in the rug a little bit, and they fired the guy, but then he came back at MSNBC, and then he became a left-wing talking figure on that network during 2020. It was amazing. That was a guy that I my earlier career, I kind of respected. I worked for these NBC stations in various parts of the country, and Brian Williams was, the heir to Tom Brokaw. And then he comes out like this. It's just everything has been like the veil has been lifted from our eyes. So you've got this major media figure, Al Sharpton, hosting the sitting vice president, the presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, for a cozy little interview. And her campaign funneled $500,000 to Al Sharpton's nonprofit just before the little chat, that little conversation, money that was never disclosed. And now MSNBC claims ignorance, and insiders are fuming over there. So what do you think? I mean, what does this mean for the media's credibility? Is it just MSNBC that you think has lost their credibility, or do you think it's the other ones as well? Like this goes down to NBC and to CBS and to ABC. What do you think of Kamala Harris's judgment in doing this, paying off people to support her without revealing that they've done this in these interviews? I mean, there should have been a little ticker at the bottom saying, this is a paid infomercial for Kamala Harris, or something of that nature, because that's what it was. But no, they would never do that. But what do you think about that? Will you ever trust them again, MSNBC or anybody else? Trust in institutions like the media, it takes years to build and minutes to shatter. And this stinks of everything voters hate about politics and the media today. And you can count me in that camp of voters who can't stand now politics and the media today. That's why we're here on this independent platform to speak freely. All right, let's bring up some comments here before we close out the show and before the Thanksgiving holiday. Let's bring them up one by one. Cameron Harris is watching those. Orlando Hodges, hey, buddy, how are you? Vice President Harris should not go on camera after a bottle of wine. She needs counseling. Tom, she should listen to your advice. Yes, thank you, Orlando. I appreciate that. Maybe I'll get into counseling. Yeah, I do some counseling, but maybe I'll do some for these political figures who have just are so disillusioned, not sure what to do, so they come out with these crazy videos, which makes their predicament all that much worse. Orlando Hodges, always good to hear from you. Thank you. Let's go now to Pi Squared. Great name. Hi, Pi Squared. NIH and CDC need to be gone. We can do better. I'll ignore the E on the end of that word because I know there's a typo. Betir, I think is what you said. Is that with the accent, I think? Pi Squared. Appreciate that. Yeah, I totally, I don't think there's any need. After what we saw in 2020, I was like so disgusted with the National Institutes of Health and the CDC. Their recommendations were so political. I mean, remember the school union president was Randy Weingarten, was consulting the CDC and telling the CDC, the union president, telling the CDC what they should do regarding lockdowns and quarantines at schools. And the CDC would consult with them before making their decisions. What in the world is that? That has nothing to do with health and science. And we know that now because those lockdowns only hurt students. They didn't help them whatsoever. They hurt them for the long term. And it may take years. I mean, Jay Bhattacharya, he said something of the nature, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like, because of the lockdowns at schools, that we have lost, I think it was like 500 million years worth collectively of damage to kids. I don't know exactly what that means, but that's what he said. It sounds bad enough. I do know this because there were some brave souls at the National Institutes of Health in 2020 before they were silenced. This is very early in the pandemic. I'm thinking about maybe April or May of 2020. And at the time, I put this individual on the air where I was working at the time. She has since been silenced. You can't find her anywhere, but she was absolutely right. And what she was warning from the NIH, and what she told every single governor in this country, that is, these quarantines and these lockdowns, they will, the mental health and mental illness consequences will persist for years after the lockdowns are lifted. And the warning was severe. If you do this, it is going to take many, many years, maybe a person's lifetime, to recoup what we have lost in this. And they did it anyway, and it's shameful. So Jay Bhattacharya and the people like him, the experts in this, should have been listened to. And that great Barrington Declaration, hopefully that'll be now something that's subscribed to by at least the health industry and the public health experts in this country. Next pandemic that comes around, hopefully much later than sooner. Appreciate it so much for that, Pi Squared. Appreciate it. Let's bring up another one here. Jim Jakowski is back. Hey, Jim. Several doctors featured on Fox were against the COVID mandates and the lockdowns. They have been proven right. They sure have. Yeah, there were a lot of doctors that would come on, and we would have, there was another gentleman who actually trained here in Michigan through Beaumont. And why is his name escaping me? Peter, I can't remember his name. Any case, a great physician, well respected, one of the leading physicians and researchers, and I think of infectious disease specialist, cardiologist in the country. And as soon as COVID came about, and he wasn't buying into all of this, these measures, and there was concern about the vaccines because of the research that he was doing on them, and he was silenced by the legacy media outlets who are under the thumb of the Democratic Party. Don't let him on your air. And listen, I was privy to some of those conversations that so and so is not allowed to come back because he's an extremist. No, he's actually a very respected physician and an expert in this, and he should have been listened to because he also turned out to be correct. I wish I remembered his name. I can't believe I forgot it. Anyway, well known, Dr. Peter so-and-so, trained at Beaumont, former Beaumont, under a great cardiologist in the Michigan area. And so anyway, let's take some more comments. I know we're running out of time here. Let's bring them up one by one. We got three more. Risk reigns. Risk reigns. Big Auto destroys Michigan and moves on, yet one leader takes the blame. Maybe talk about the predatory auto companies that exploit us, ravish resources, and cause entire state economies to crumble. I don't know what you're talking about, Risk. I'm sorry, I don't. But Big Auto destroys Michigan and moves on. Why are they moving on? That's the question. This is it's and you're right. I mean, you look at the things that GM has done, and they've gone into these areas like Flint, and you look at Saginaw area. You can look at Lansing and these plants that were thriving at one time, and people were working there, and they had to close those plants, and people lost their jobs, and it drastically affected those communities. Absolutely, that's correct. But what leads to those decisions? They are in business. And there's a lot of things that happen in the state that are not business friendly, and that ends up seeping down to the citizens and the workers, and then these communities. I mean, look at Detroit, thriving into a thriving city, and Hamtramck, and you can go through the various areas. They put up shop, but then they have to leave. Why is that? And you could look at recent history. Why were they closing down, internal combustion engine shops? Why do you think that was the case? Because of policy decisions and these mandates that effectively were forcing these automakers to create electric vehicle, and they had to build new plants and shut down the old ones because that was now suddenly mandated to be the wave of the future. So that's kind of, in one sense, the middleman in this whole thing here. And people like to blame the corporations. In some cases, that's true. But why are corporations leaving? Over-regulation, taxes, very unfriendly business environments, being punished for making money. Punished means really the government is being greedy, and they want to take the money that you've made and use it so they can spin it around amongst their little inner circles as well. To me, that's really what's going on. But I appreciate your comment. I think that's where you're going, and if you weren't, I apologize. Two quick ones. Let's bring them up, and I'll try to be quick on my end here. Pi Squared. I like you, Tom. I'll be back. Thank you, Pi Squared. I like you too, Pi Squared. One day we'll meet and we'll figure out what your real name is. And maybe that is it. I apologize if I just offended you and making fun of your name. Appreciate it. Pi Squared. Always come back. Let's bring up one more here. Charles Beatty's back. I am thankful for your show. You and your team have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone listening and watching. I am thankful for you too, Charles. I really, absolutely, it means so much to me and the team here at Tom Jordan Live. There's so much work that goes on behind the scenes here, trying to make the show as successful as possible. So your support means so much to us. We do hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Be grateful for what we have, our freedoms. If you've got a place to live, some food to eat, family members, even if you don't agree on ideological grounds or politically, be thankful for those around you, that there are people in your life who probably still care about you and care about them as well. God bless you. Have a fantastic holiday. We'll see you back here again. Take care.